Ahoy, curious soul. You've just stepped into my digital universe, and I'm thrilled to have you here. First time on board? Hit that subscribe button and beam this video over to your fellow Earthlings. Tell me where in the world you're watching from. I seriously love seeing all your amazing locations pop up in the comments. Ready? Let's make some noise. The instant I spotted the name on the flight list, it struck me with the force of a sledgehammer to the ribs. Second passenger of 2. Rachel Hale. Final stop. Bridgetown, Barbados. Scheduled departure, 6:49 a.m. I stood rooted to the spot, eyes locked on the paper in my hand, fingers greasy and trembling around the clipboard. Behind me, the King Air's engines clicked faintly as they cooled, the sound echoing like a nervous tick in the pre-dawn quiet of Piedmont Regional. Captain Hayes lingered nearby, waiting for my maintenance clearance, but I couldn't take my eyes off that name. Rachel Hale, my wife, the same woman who claimed she was headed to Bali for a week-long wellness retreat. "You okay, Gray?" Hayes asked, pushing his mirrored aviators higher on his nose. "You look like someone just walked over your grave." I steadied my hand, scribbled my signature, and gave him a curt nod. "Yeah, everything's good, Captain. Safe flying." But it wasn't good. It hadn't been for some time. Late-night calls she took in the bathroom with the door locked, her sudden obsession with flipping her phone screen down. The bank charges I didn't recognize, designer shops, restaurants I'd never even heard of. 6 years of marriage teaches you to notice shifts, teaches you to recognize when something's been quietly unraveling. Her latest Instagram story, time-stamped just 2 hours earlier, showed a perfect sunset with the caption, #Bali vibes, a complete lie. Back at the hangar, I pulled out my phone and opened her account. 800,000 followers, all eating up every filtered shot and faux inspirational quote. The newest post showed her in lotus position, backlit by a tropical view, eyes closed like she was one with the universe. The comments came pouring in. Incredible journey. Total goals. So peaceful. None of them had any idea what was really going on. I swiped back to the image I'd snapped of the flight manifest. That's when the second name caught my eye. My stomach twisted tighter. Felix Durand. It rang a bell. Rachel had casually mentioned him once, after a college reunion in Charlotte. "Just some guy from my marketing class," she'd said when I asked about a group photo she'd been tagged in. "He's all about startups and crypto. Classic bro energy." Yeah, I knew the kind. A little too well, it seemed. Back in my narrow office, I did what anyone in my shoes would have done. I started digging. Felix Durand's LinkedIn read like a startup fever dream. Founder and CEO of something called Wellness Chain. Some crypto health fusion I couldn't make heads or tails of. His profile photo was pure arrogance. Perfectly tailored suit, smug smirk, and probably a Tesla just outside the frame. His personal Instagram was private, but his company's page wasn't locked. There he was, front and center at tech expos, giving keynote talks, schmoozing investors. I scrolled down 6 weeks and found the post that stopped me cold. A dinner photo from Charlotte. Felix seated with one arm draped around a woman whose face was turned slightly away. Caption, "Celebrating new partnerships with amazing people." Around her neck was the silver locket I'd given Rachel for our 3rd anniversary. I sank into my office chair, the buzz of the overhead fluorescents pulsing like hornets. Just a few yards away, Jimmy was hammering away at an engine mount, his tools echoing against the metal walls, everyday noise in a world that still felt solid. My phone buzzed, a message from Rachel. "Landed safe. The retreat is gorgeous. Might not have signal most of the day, so don't worry if I'm quiet. Love you, love." I nearly laughed, but it came out like a cough, flat, bitter, hollow. Sure, love. I opened Find My iPhone. Her location dot blinked steadily over Barbados, so she hadn't lied about the country, just everything else, especially about who she was traveling with. I stood, walked to the break room, and poured myself a mug of Jimmy's so-called coffee, thick as sludge, bitter as betrayal. It did what it needed to do, cleared my head. Time to think like a technician. Diagnose it like a failing system. Keep emotion out of it. Focus on data, precision, clarity. What did I know for sure? Rachel never went to Bali. She flew to Barbados, and she didn't go alone. She was with Felix Durand. There had been something wrong with her behavior for some time. Subtle at first, but recently, the signs had become impossible to ignore, especially with the strange new expenses showing up on our credit card. Purchases I couldn't trace, from vendors I didn't recognize. I didn't have the full picture yet, but I could feel myself closing in on it. When I pulled up the app for our shared bank account, my chest tightened. Nearly 40 grand, gone. Transferred out over the last 2 months to an account I'd never seen before. The house fund we'd spent years growing, nearly emptied. "You've got to be kidding me," I murmured. From the far side of the hangar, Jimmy glanced up. "What was that, Gray?" I waved him off. "Nothing. Just talking to myself." But it wasn't just idle muttering. Inside, I was burning. Rachel was off in some tropical location, likely wrapped in someone else's sheets, while her online followers thought she was finding herself on a spiritual sabbatical in Bali. Once I got back to my office, I fired up my laptop. If she was playing dirty, I wasn't going to play fair. I just had to outthink her. First stop, the iCloud account we still shared. Rachel was never especially tech-savvy. She always left her sync settings on by default. Sure enough, everything was still linked. Her entire photo library was accessible, including images she hadn't posted publicly. There it was, Rachel seated across from Felix at a candlelit dinner, their fingers laced over a linen tablecloth. Another shot showed them standing on what looked like a construction site, Felix holding rolled-up blueprints, Rachel smiling like she'd just closed a deal. Then came the photo that made my breath hitch, both of them posing in front of a half-completed resort structure. A sign behind them read, "Serenity Cove Resort, coming soon." Felix's arm was around her waist. The look on their faces was pure triumph, celebrating their win, funded by my bank account. I took screenshots of every single image. But that wasn't all. Her laptop was still linked to the cloud, giving me access to her browser history, saved logins, and recent files. What I uncovered confirmed every suspicion, and went further than I'd imagined. There were months of emails exchanged between her and Felix, plans for a startup they called Serenity Wellness Retreat, pitch decks aimed at investors, highlighting Rachel's social media following as their primary marketing asset. Then came the worst blow, a divorce filing. Still a draft, not submitted yet, but clearly ready to be used when the time was right. She was planning to vanish, with the money, once the paperwork was in motion and her new venture secured. One particular message from Felix stood out. "Once we show investors your engagement stats, we're going to be swimming in money. This resort is a gold mine, babe. And your husband? He won't know what hit him." "Won't know what hit him." I leaned back in my chair, cracking my knuckles like I always did, before digging into a complicated mechanical job. That's exactly what this was now. Something broken that needed rebuilding. Except this time, it wasn't an engine or a fuselage. It was my life, my trust, my marriage. And I had no intention of putting it back together the way she expected. I opened a fresh browser tab and began looking into corporate registration laws in Barbados. Then I tracked down permitting documents tied to Felix's supposed development. Finally, I started assembling a contact list: regulators, officials, media outlets, anyone who needed to learn that Rachel Hale wasn't the person she claimed to be. By the time Jimmy finished for the day and headed out, I had a plan sketched out, step by precise step. People rarely understand the kind of brainpower it takes to work in aircraft maintenance. They see the grease and grime and think we're just mechanics. But today's airplanes are intricate systems of wiring, software, hydraulics, and high-grade alloys. If you don't master every system, every connection, you don't survive in this field. That work teaches you patience, accuracy. You can't afford a single mistake. A small oversight in this job doesn't just cost time or money, it can cost human lives. Rachel was about to find out just how meticulous I could be. I started quietly. The following morning, as she uploaded another sun-drenched yoga pose from a location that was most definitely not Bali, I began dismantling her illusion, methodically, silently, one carefully laid lie at a time. The first thing I did was quietly change the password on the Apple ID Rachel, and I still shared. I didn't stir up any suspicion, just casually mentioned that I'd been receiving a flood of spam lately and wanted to boost our digital security. That single adjustment unlocked access to her iCloud backups, including message threads she must have thought were long deleted. What I found in her conversation with Felix made my fists clench. Their scheme had been in motion far longer than I'd imagined. The so-called wellness retreat? A smokescreen. The truth was, they were down in Barbados scouting fake properties for a make-believe luxury resort. An elaborate scam they were bankrolling with embezzled investor funds. And worse, some of it was mine. 2 days before, she'd texted Felix something that knocked the wind out of me. "Can't wait to see you." Gray has no clue. He's so deep in work, I could rob a bank and he wouldn't notice. She wasn't wrong about me being buried in projects, but she had no idea just how sharply I'd started noticing. My next target was the influencer empire she'd spent years curating, her online identity. Rachel had tied her Instagram to a web of platforms: Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and her blog, all orchestrated through a content scheduler called Buffer. Her login details were stored in her browser, conveniently synced to the same shared iCloud account. I didn't delete a single post. That would have set off alarms. I went with a subtler strategy. I altered the timing of her queued content. Every post that featured her in Bali got pushed to 3 a.m. Eastern Time, a digital dead zone for her American audience. Then, I began inserting new material. Old pictures resurfaced and published during peak hours, tagged in places that directly contradicted her supposed location. By noon, her audience was rattled. Comment sections started filling with confusion. Followers asked why her real-time Bali updates looked like recycled material. Some of the more observant fans even pointed out that the lighting in the sky didn't line up with the time zone she claimed to be in. But I wasn't finished. I was just getting started peeling back the illusion. Her email was the real gold mine. It held years' worth of brand partnerships, sponsor lists, and media contacts, all cataloged and current. I composed a message to be sent the next morning to every one of her professional connections. Subject: Important update regarding brand partnerships. Body: Dear partners, I'm reaching out to share that recent personal developments may affect my ability to meet existing and upcoming content obligations. Due to emerging legal and financial challenges, I cannot guarantee the consistency or reliability of my platform moving forward. I sincerely regret any inconvenience this may cause to your marketing operations. Warm regards, Rachel Hale. It struck the right balance, credible enough to be taken seriously, vague enough to unsettle. Enough to make brand teams panic, wondering what kind of PR disaster they might be entangled in. While I carried out my work, Rachel kept texting. Her messages were filled with spiritual jargon about her transformative journey, about how rejuvenated she felt. Each word grated on me. I responded calmly. "That sounds incredible, babe. Can't wait to hear more." I needed her to believe I was none the wiser. I wanted her to keep posting those heavily edited beach shots. Some even featured Felix in the blurry background. I wanted her to keep taking Zoom calls from a place she swore she wasn't in. Every staged moment was another weapon I'd soon turn against her. By nightfall, I was ready for the next step. I had located the landing page for Serenity Cove Resort, Felix's digital masterpiece, the core of their deception. The website was slick and professional, showcasing glossy 3D mock-ups of seaside villas, high-end spas, and luxury amenities. There were glowing guest reviews and polished photos that painted a dream. But the real treasure was the investor portal, a members-only login for financial backers to monitor the supposed progress of their tropical dream. Thanks to Rachel's saved login data, I was able to access Felix's email account. And from there, I pulled the credentials needed to enter the investor dashboard. In an instant, I found myself staring into the very heart of their fraudulent operation. What I discovered that afternoon exposed just how elaborate their scheme truly was. Felix had managed to swindle over $200,000 from a group of 12 investors, each convinced they were contributing to a genuine high-end resort venture. The money had been securely tucked away in a Cayman Islands offshore account, waiting to be moved into an account under Rachel's name the moment our divorce was finalized, at which point I'd have no legal leverage to stop it. The con had been executed with precision. Their only error was misjudging the man they were stealing from. Over the next few hours, I meticulously compiled proof. I captured screenshots of suspicious financial transactions, saved copies of falsified registration documents, and downloaded audio clips of Felix pitching the project. Audio files I uncovered thanks to his voicemail syncing automatically with his email. Then I began making calls of my own. My first call was to the Barbados Ministry of Tourism. I reported a likely case of investor fraud, targeting American citizens under the guise of a fake resort development. I provided Felix's details, copies of the forged paperwork, and proof that he was operating without proper authorizations. My next call was to the Federal Trade Commission. There, I formally filed a report against Rachel, citing her secret business ties and deceptive online endorsements. Then I turned my attention to the people Felix had defrauded. Using a freshly created anonymous email account, I sent personalized warnings to each of the 12 investors. The message was short but direct. You may want to investigate Serenity Cove Resort before investing further. The attached evidence raises serious doubts about the legitimacy of the project and the individuals behind it. Along with the message, I included screenshots of private conversations between Rachel and Felix, images of the fake paperwork, and photos of the alleged resort site, which, according to property records, was nothing more than an abandoned hotel covered up to look like something new. By the time the clock hit midnight, I felt physically spent, but mentally vindicated. I'd triggered a chain of events aimed at dismantling the fantasy world Rachel and Felix had constructed out of fraud, illusion, and misappropriated money. And yet, I knew my work wasn't done, not even close. The next morning, I made a bold move that felt both impulsive and entirely justified. I booked a flight to Barbados. If Rachel had imagined a picture-perfect escape with Felix, I was going to rewrite the ending, with an audience. And the irony? I used our joint credit card to pay for the flight. The same card Rachel had used to fund her desertion from our marriage was now footing the bill for my counterstrike. If there was one lesson I'd taken from her betrayal, it was this. Sometimes, poetic justice means letting the villain pay for their own collapse. I called in sick for the first time in 3 years, telling Jimmy, my boss, that a family emergency had come up. It wasn't a lie, really. My family was unraveling before anyone else even saw the threads coming loose. The 6-hour flight to Bridgetown left me with more than enough time to sit alone with my thoughts. Probably too much. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw the look Rachel had in those pictures with Felix. The way she gazed at him, as if he were her dream finally come true, was a look she had never once given me. Not even back when everything between us was still untouched and whole. But the thought that kept cutting deepest wasn't the betrayal in her eyes. It was the $47,000 she'd drained from our accounts. That was money I'd earned through sheer exhaustion, clocking endless overtime, grinding through 60-hour weeks. Money we had once saved to buy our first house. And now, it was being funneled into some con artist's fantasy. That was the thought that brought my focus into razor clarity. I touched down in Barbados around 2 in the afternoon and hailed a taxi to the small inn I'd booked online. It was a no-frills spot, roughly 10 minutes away from where Rachel and Felix were holed up. I'd tracked their location using the Find My iPhone feature, then matched the coordinates to listings on upscale hotel sites. That's how I found their lodging. Coral Bay Suites, a posh boutique resort charging $800 a night, all courtesy of my credit line. But I didn't head there right away. First, I wanted to see the so-called construction site, the location Felix had paraded as the foundation for his supposed wellness resort empire. The driver, Winston, a cheerful Barbadian local, was content to idle while I explored the property. "You planning to invest here?" he asked, his tone casual but curious. "People have been buzzing about this spot." "Something along those lines," I replied vaguely. What lay before me was exactly what I'd feared. A construction project frozen in time, a hotel that hadn't seen progress in over 2 years. The sleek sign Felix and Rachel had used in their investor materials, clearly fabricated recently. Professionally done, yes, but freshly planted. It reeked of a hasty staging job, probably cost a few $1,000s tops to give the illusion of legitimate development. I began documenting the scene, snapping images of the decaying site, rusted equipment left to rot, vegetation growing wild and unchecked, and shattered windows sealed up with warped plywood. There wasn't a trace of real progress. It was all a lie. Felix's pitch deck was built on smoke and mirrors. But then I heard something that froze me mid-step, voices close by. Moving silently around the side of the main structure, I followed the sound until I reached the remnants of the resort's beachfront terrace. There they were, Felix and Rachel, perched at a table covered in printouts, laptops open and humming, their phones connected to a portable battery pack. Felix paced furiously as he spoke into his phone, gesturing like a man deep in the rhythm of a cell. "No, listen, this is bigger than a resort," he insisted, full of manic enthusiasm. "We're talking about an immersive wellness platform. Think, meditation experiences verified by blockchain, spa packages as NFTs. It's the next evolution of high-end travel." I crouched low in the undergrowth, letting the dense brush hide me as I quietly started recording on my phone. Rachel sat comfortably nearby in a flowing white sundress I didn't recognize, her eyes hidden behind oversized luxury sunglasses. She was steadily typing, pausing occasionally to look up at Felix with a proud, almost adoring smile. "Make sure you bring up the social media angle," she called out. "The Instagram integration." Felix shot her a thumbs up without missing a beat. "Here's the clincher," he continued. "My partner here's got nearly 1 million followers, all into wellness, mindfulness, all that stuff. We're talking built-in exposure to the exact demographic willing to pay premium for this kind of exclusivity. It's instant traction." I kept the camera rolling. When he ended the call, Felix dropped into the chair beside her, and they shared a kiss, sloppy, heated, their hands roaming like teenagers in the back seat of a car. Her laptop screen was still open, showing a spreadsheet full of forecasted revenue. "How much did Peterson agree to?" she asked, her voice low but eager. "50,000, Felix replied. "Thompson's about ready to commit 75 once he sees the photos." "You mean the fake photos?" Rachel added, laughing. "The very fake ones," Felix echoed, cracking up. "God, I love how devious you are." Rachel stretched back in her chair, basking in the sunshine, completely at ease in the falsehood they were weaving. "I'm still amazed Gray hasn't pieced it together yet," she said lazily. "Some days I swear I married the most oblivious man on earth." Felix grinned. "All the better for us." "How much more can I transfer before he starts asking questions?" she asked. "Maybe another $20,000, Felix said thoughtfully. "But we need to move on those divorce papers soon. My lawyer warned me that dragging this out could complicate the asset split." He reached over and intertwined his fingers with hers. "Once this weekend's done," he said, "we'll have raised enough capital that none of it will matter. You'll serve him the papers, hold on to what counts, and in 6 months, we'll be living like royalty out here." "And what happens when the investors figure out there's no resort?" Rachel asked, her tone now a bit more serious. Felix gave a shrug, brushing it off. "What are they gonna do? File a lawsuit from the States? We'll be long gone. Different passports, different country, clean slate." Rachel let out a sharp, high laugh that echoed across the cracked tile of the terrace, slicing through the humid air like broken glass. "You make it sound so easy." "Because it is easy," Felix said. "That's the trick. Wealthy Americans don't look too hard when they think they're getting in on something exclusive." I'd heard enough. Without another glance, I slipped back the way I came, every step heavy with a strange, calm certainty. For the first time in weeks, since I saw Rachel's name on that boarding list, I knew exactly what I needed to do. "New plan," I said to Winston as I climbed into the back seat. "Take me to the nearest police station." About 2 hours later, I found myself sitting across from Detective Inspector Patricia Williams of the Royal Barbados Police Force. I laid out everything I'd compiled over the past 3 days, audio files, screenshots, and documents, spreading digital proof across the screen of my phone. She scrolled through the evidence, nodding slowly. "You've done some serious digging," she said. "Are you absolutely sure they haven't left the island?" "They're holed up at the Coral Bay Suites," I replied. "Room 312. Williams scribbled the address into her notebook without missing a beat. "Investment fraud that targets international tourists," she said firmly. "We take that kind of thing very seriously. Tourism's our lifeline. We can't afford to let crooks jeopardize that." She made a flurry of phone calls while I waited, her voice sharp, clipped, and fast in Bajan English. I couldn't catch all the words, but the urgency and professionalism were unmistakable. At last, she turned back to me. "We'll need a formal statement," she said, "and full access to all of your documentation. But based on what you've given us here," she tapped the screen, "this is more than enough to act." "What happens now?" I asked. She stood up and offered a faint smile. "Now, Mr. Hale, we go pay a visit to your wife and her business partner. The arrests happened right around sunset, which felt strangely poetic. Rachel and Felix were sipping drinks on their hotel balcony when Detective Williams and 2 uniformed officers knocked at their door. I remained outside in the parking lot, leaning against Winston's cab, trying to blend in as just another weary traveler. From where I stood, I had a perfect view through the glass doors. Rachel's initial confusion quickly gave way to horror as the situation unraveled. Felix, ever the opportunist, attempted to flee. He shoved one officer and bolted for the stairwell. He barely made it 10 steps before they slammed him to the pavement and cuffed him. By the time they were marched outside, Rachel was sobbing. Big, performative tears she probably thought might earn her some mercy. But the second her gaze locked onto mine, the show came to a sudden halt. "Gray?" she cried out, voice cracking with disbelief. "Gray, what are you doing here?" I didn't say a word. I simply stood there, watching as they led her toward the cruiser. Her sundress, white, once elegant, was now wrinkled. The expensive sunglasses were gone. She looked diminished, stripped of the persona she'd carefully crafted. For a fleeting second, she resembled the woman I'd once married, back before she'd convinced herself she was destined for more than life with a mechanic. Her voice cut through the glass. "You did this!" she screamed. "You bastard! You did this to me!" Detective Williams came over as the patrol cars began to pull away. "They'll be processed tonight," she said. "Court appearance tomorrow morning. The legal process will take time, but with what you've provided, the charges are solid." "What exactly are they being charged with?" I asked her. "Wire fraud, money laundering, theft by deception, and in your wife's case," she added, "identity theft as well, for using your personal information to open unauthorized accounts. If they're convicted, they're both looking at serious prison time." I gave a slow nod, but I wasn't fully present. I kept replaying Rachel's expression, how quickly her confidence collapsed the moment she realized who had pulled the rug out from under her. Winston drove me back in silence. Earlier, he'd mentioned he'd been driving taxis here for over 20 years, said he'd seen plenty of wild stories unfold. As we pulled up to the hotel, he finally broke the silence. "That woman really do all that to you?" "She did," I said quietly. "And you came all the way down here just to watch her get arrested?" I shook my head. "I came to make sure she couldn't hurt anyone else." He nodded, a quiet sort of approval in his voice. "Good. That's justice. People think they can scam their way through life, but truth always catches up." The next morning, I checked out of the hotel and boarded a flight home to Charlotte. By the time the plane landed, the news had already started spreading. It wasn't headline-worthy, just a small column in the business section about a bogus investment operation targeting elderly American retirees. But there were mugshots, both Rachel's and Felix's, published right alongside the article, and people had started asking questions on her social media pages. While I was mid-air, the scheduled emails I'd drafted to her brand sponsors had gone out. By the time I reached my apartment, her Instagram account had been disabled for policy violations. Her personal website was offline, and 3 of her largest corporate partners had already released public statements cutting ties with her and her brand. Her wellness empire fell apart in under 48 hours. That first night back in what was now solely my house, I sifted through the remnants she'd left behind. Her wardrobe still lined the closet. The bathroom counter remained cluttered with her makeup. Her laptop rested on the kitchen table, screen aglow with a browser tab searching for countries without extradition treaties. She had clearly planned to flee. Even after betraying me, misleading her followers, and defrauding her backers, her exit strategy wasn't accountability. It was escape. But I'd made sure there wouldn't be a corner of the world far enough for her to vanish into. Over the next few days, I gave interviews to federal agents, submitted documentation to attorneys representing the victims of Felix's scheme, and spoke with a reporter investigating influencer-led fraud. With each new account I gave, I peeled back another false layer, another facade in the wreckage of what my marriage had become. The most excruciating part, though, was facing the people closest to me and laying out the truth. My brother Dave flew in from Virginia, lugging a case of beer and bringing with him that typical uneasy brotherly concern, firm back pats and long, awkward pauses. On his second night, he finally asked, "You holding up okay?" "I'm managing," I told him, and I wasn't lying. Honestly, I felt more grounded than I had in weeks. "You don't seem angry." I hesitated. I was angry. But anger, I'd learned, doesn't fix anything. It muddies your thinking, makes you reckless. He gave me a nod that said he understood, but his eyes betrayed the truth. He didn't. He couldn't fathom how I had calmly dismantled my wife's life piece by piece in a matter of days and walked away from it with something closer to quiet satisfaction than rage. But that's the thing about working with machines. Sometimes, when something's beyond repair, you have no choice but to break it down completely and rebuild it from the ground up. Nearly 3 weeks went by before I got a call from Detective Williams. She informed me that both Rachel and Felix had been extradited to the U.S. and would be facing federal prosecution. Felix, it seemed, was cooperating with authorities in hopes of a reduced sentence. Rachel, however, was still denying wrongdoing, and she wanted to speak with me. "She says there are things you don't know," Williams told me, claims she needs to explain. "There's nothing she could possibly say that I haven't already figured out," I replied. "You're certain?" Hearing it from her might bring a sense of closure. Closure. As if our marriage had just been some business arrangement waiting to be neatly concluded. "I'm sure," I said. But the truth was more complicated. Part of me did wonder what she thought she could possibly say that might reframe any of this. What story could justify emptying our savings and chasing after a fantasy built on lies? Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. 2 days later, I drove to the federal courthouse in Charlotte for what was to be our one and only meeting before her trial began. Rachel entered the visitation room wearing a bright orange jumpsuit, noticeably thinner than the last time I'd seen her. Her once flawless hair, once styled for daily social media content, now fell limp and dull around her face. We sat across from each other in a sterile room, bathed in harsh fluorescent light that made everything look jaundiced. A federal marshal stood by the door. A camera recorded every second. "You look good," Rachel said, an absurd comment given the circumstances. I nearly laughed. "Appreciate it," I said. "I know you must hate me," she continued. "I know I seem like the worst person in the world. But I never intended for things to turn out like this." "What exactly did you intend?" Her eyes dropped to her hands, which were folded tightly on the cold steel table between us. "I was planning to leave you. I wanted a divorce. But I didn't want to walk away from 6 years of my life with nothing to show for it. I needed something to start over. So you decided to take $47,000. I didn't take it, she said. I borrowed it. I always planned to pay it back once the resort started turning a profit. The resort that never existed. Her voice cracked, just slightly. The mask of confidence began to slip. Felix convinced me it was real, she said quietly. He showed me everything. Blueprints, licenses, financial projections. It all looked legitimate. I thought we were investing in something genuine. You thought you could quietly divert funds and still call it legitimate. That wasn't stealing, she insisted. It was our money. I stared across the table at the woman I'd lived with, loved and trusted for over 6 years, and realized, with a sick kind of clarity, that she truly believed that. In her mind, she wasn't an accomplice in Felix's scheme, just another casualty of it. "Rachel," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've heard the recordings. I listened to you and Felix laughing at me, calling me blind. I heard you talk about how easy it was to move money around without me noticing. I watched you kiss him while discussing how you'd vanish with stolen funds." Her face went ghostly white. "You were recording me?" she asked, voice trembling. "I was protecting myself," I replied, "and trying to stop you from wrecking even more lives." The room fell silent. The ceiling lights buzzed faintly above us, like angry insects trapped in a jar. "What happens to me now?" she finally asked. "That's for the judge to decide. If they put you on the stand, will you testify?" Her voice cracked as she said it. Then the tears came. Big, messy sobs. The same ones she'd put on when the handcuffs clicked shut outside our house. But this time, I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not sadness, not even relief. Just a flat, distant calm, like the emotion had been drained out of me. "I loved you," she choked. "I know it doesn't matter now, but I did. I really did." "Maybe you did," I said quietly. "But I think you loved the idea of the life you wanted even more." A marshal gave the smallest nod from the corner. It was time. I stood to leave. As I turned toward the door, her hand clutched my sleeve. "Please, Gray. I'm sorry, I mean it. Can't you forgive me?" I looked down at her fingers on my arm, then met her gaze. For just a second, I saw flashes of the woman I once knew, the one who used to set out my coffee before work, who'd fall asleep during old movie nights, who once said her greatest wish was a quiet life full of small joys. But that woman didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never really had. "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. But forgiveness isn't the same as rebuilding trust, and it doesn't erase the damage. I walked out without another word. I never saw her again. 6 months later, Rachel was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Felix, the mastermind, got 7. Authorities managed to recover about 60% of the money through seized assets. Rachel's influencer brand collapsed. Her Instagram was permanently deleted. Her website changed hands. Her presence in the wellness world vanished like smoke. As for me, I stayed on at the airport, doing the same work I'd done for years, fixing what was broken, making sure aircraft were safe. It was honest, reliable work, the kind of work that lets a man sleep soundly. Now and then someone would ask if I missed being married. I'd answer, I miss being married to someone real. But I didn't miss living with a person who was always performing. Those 6 years taught me something I've never forgotten. People aren't engines. You can't just swap out a part and expect them to run right again. They have to want to change. And some people, like Rachel, aren't interested in being fixed. They find purpose in the damage they cause. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore.